First Academy in Leesburg.
Okay.
Is that part of Leesburg Baptist Church?
Yeah, it is.
Is it?
First
Okay.
Baptist Leesburg.
Okay.
So, get to know people. Oh, sorry.
Let's start by reviewing the history of the Jewish people. So who was the first Jewish person? That's right. And then his great-grandson Joseph got sold as a slave to where?
Egypt.
Right. And so the family ended up being in Egypt for how long? 400 years. Okay.
I'm going to go grab those Bibles.
Okay. And then who delivered them out of Egypt? I mean, God did, but yes, through Moses. And Moses was the first of this kind of leader, followed by a series of other similar type leaders. We call those types of leaders what? Well, yeah, he was a prophet, but politically speaking, civilly speaking, he was a judge. So he would judge in disputes between people, and then he appointed other sub-judges. And so then there was a series of judges that were really more of, it's very complicated, but some of them were really just military commanders. But anyway, the important thing is the last leader of this time period, it's a transitional figure. Anybody know? Starts with an S.
Samuel?
Yes. Samuel would have been, because Eli was the leader. We would call him a judge. And then, Samuel grew up in the temple. And he was the last from this time period, and he anointed the first two leaders of this time period. Yes. So what we call the monarchy began, and we draw it like this because very quickly the Davidic, here's David, right in the middle of history at 1000. The Davidic line quickly lost most of the kingdom, and only the dynasty went through Judah. They only kept one tribe, or two, or three, depending on how you count the tribes. So this is the north, Israel. This is the south, Judah. The south lasted about 150 years longer. And then what ended both kingdoms, just at different time periods? Yes. So we're focused on Judah and Jerusalem. So this was the exile. And then there's another time period, which we refer to as the post-exile. And what happened in that time period, historically speaking?
Rebuilding.
Yeah, people were returning from exile and rebuilding. And there were other books of the Bible being written. Chronicles was written during the post-exile about this time period, and Kings was written during the exile about the same time period, but from a different point of view. And then Jesus came. So that is the history of the Jewish people, and it's important to note that Isaiah lived right here, right there, from like there to there in history. So he got to witness the fall of the north and predicted the fall of the south. Okay, and he was looking ahead to this coming destruction, and then to the return, and then to Jesus coming, and then to Jesus' second coming. So he's looking ahead to all that, prophesying about all that.
It's a good thing you stopped. I ran out of paper.
Yeah. I ran out of whiteboard, so. Now, we've been through chapters 1 through 12. And this lesson 4 is called The Gleaning of Two More Themes, because we had the harvest, which was the big ideas, and then what they would let the poor people go back and glean what was left over. So we're going to go back through and glean 2 more themes, which are not quite as big of ideas, but they're still very important.
And the spoils, right? They call them spoils? What was left over?
That's usually after a war. I was just talking about after a harvest. I think they call it the gleaning.
No, that's the, yeah,
That's the verb.
that's the verb.
There's a noun form. You see how we like to talk about semantics. Okay, so the harvest was sin, 1 through 5, Isaiah's vision and purge and call, chapter 6, and then the threats that were realized in 7 through 12, and the glimmers of hope, or the stump. Then what we would get to, if we were going to go on, would be chapter 13. But that begins a huge section of 11 chapters long. So just go ahead, if we were going to go on, which we're not, but if we were going to, look at chapter 13 and just flip through your Bible and look for the headings that your modern editor has inserted in chapters 13 through 23 and see if you notice anything. I've got plenty of Bibles here if anybody wants a paper Bible. Oh, that was a close call.
Whoa, it was reckless.
That was reckless.
Did not reckon.
Yeah, we've got more. There's plenty more. If anybody else wants one. I was a little more cautious.
I saw a paper in your office, and it was my name written.
It's listed various
On hold.
cities and
A lot of people are being judged. Yes. Does anyone else know? Yeah. On what nations?
see Babylon.
Babylon, Egypt, Assyria. Yeah. Tyre. Yeah, it just keeps going. All these
Just
different
say
ones.
many.
Yes. We'll just say many. So, yeah, God's judgment against many nations. That's what that section is all about. So what we had in 1 through 12 was God's judgment against Israel and Judah, his people. And then 13 through 23, his judgment on the rest.
So again, we're not actually going to be studying 13 through 23
No.
today. But
No,
that's
it's-
just so you know.
Yes.
We're going back and gleaning. We already harvested 1 through 12. We're going to glean it now.
Yeah. So 1 through 12 was God's judgment against Israel and Judah, but it was sprinkled with hope. So before we go on to more judgment, let's go back through and focus on those sprinkles of hope today. Now the reason I did this timeline is because in order to understand these little sections that are about hope, we need to understand the time periods. So Roman numeral 1 is time periods. And obviously things are bad in Isaiah's day. We talked about that at length. And their immediate future holds judgment and destruction. Therefore, most of the hope sections are regarding the more distant future. Okay? So, to put that in a breakdown, there's 5 time periods that Isaiah is writing about. The present, which is around 730, of course. It's more than just that, because he had a long ministry. And as we've seen, the key word for that time period, Isaiah's day, is sin.
So that's the blank.
Yeah, that's the blanket number 1. And then the next time period would be the exile, which was 722 for Israel and roughly 150 years later for Judah. And the key word for that time period is judgment. And so we're talking about hope today, so most of the hope is going to come in these last 3. time periods. And they're all future for Isaiah. I mean, even the judgment's future for him, but they're more distant future for Isaiah. So the return in roughly 500 BC. And that was hope for the Jews who were going to return, but it was judgment for those who took them, which would be Assyria and Babylon. So hope and judgment for number 3. And then time period number 4 is the Messiah's first coming, which is, roughly 0 to 33. Not exactly that, but around there. And that time period, the key words would be hope for those who believe in him and judgment for those who rejected him.
These blanks are kind of small.
Well, I was just saying hope and judgment. You don't have to write all of that. But you may. I will allow it.
That's my papers too.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just in our blood. Yeah.
And then the last time period is what we call eschatology, and Isaiah calls the last days. And again, the key words are hope and judgment. Who do you think the hope is for, and who do you think the judgment is for in the end times? Yes, that's the hope. We look forward to it, and the unbelievers don't. Looking at it from an ancient Jewish point of view, what? Yes, the wheat and the chaff is a great image of that. And when they see these wicked nations slaughtering their people and taking them captive and oppressing them from Egypt to Midian, now to Assyria, and then Babylon, they see that as hope for the oppressed and judgment for the oppressor. Yeah. Things will be made right in the end. So those are the five time periods that Isaiah writes about. Katie, can you read this paragraph here?
Yeah. Part of what makes Isaiah so confusing is that he interweaves verses about these 5 different time periods. You might think that Isaiah should have organized his book more logically, but actually the more you understand the human condition, sin, and God's reaction to it, judgment and hope, the more you will see that it is all interconnected, sorry, I was guessing. Interconnected and inseparable. So let's dive in.
So yeah, when he's writing about different time periods, it can get pretty confusing, and you might wonder, why doesn't he just talk about one time period for 5 chapters and move on? He does that a little bit, but it's all interconnected. So hopefully we can untangle that a little bit, and you'll see why it's connected like that. Okay, so that's the time periods. Now, the big point here is Roman numeral 2, passages about hope, which we skipped the first time we went through 1 through 12. When you're looking at the passages of hope, 2 major themes arise. Can anyone guess what those might be?
Coming Messiah?
Well, that's definitely involved in both of them, but that's not what I have. It's probably equally or more correct than what I have, but a remnant.
That's kind of what he's thinking of through that whole time period. They were having wars and people conquering.
Yes, well, that's not what I'm talking about, but a surviving remnant and a purified remnant. 2 different.
That's not what he has.
2 different. No, it's not what I have. 2 different uses of remnant are very important
And
themes.
these are all themes. You're all great.
Well, they're all interrelated to these themes. But what I have is, the first one is the day of the Lord. I thought maybe somebody would look at, letter A is day of the Lord, so it's probably that. letter B's. Okay. I was expecting you to be cheaters, but you were so honest. I love it. I'm used to teaching high schoolers and college students. And the second theme, so the day of the Lord, and the second theme is the New Jerusalem.
Okay.
So you
Which-
can see how the Lord's coming is an element of those.
The New Jerusalem is the second one, and the day of the Lord.
See, I was thinking we were talking about going back to what we first talked about and how they got to this point.
Right. There was some passages I skipped because otherwise it would have been too hard to get in the big picture. So we're just going to go through and pick up these themes which get developed throughout the course of the whole book and see what we've learned about them in 1 through 12. So, letter A is the day of the Lord. In Isaiah's words, the first time he mentions this is, "For the Lord of hosts has a day in store." What does that mean? The Lord of hosts has a day in store. Just on the very most.
The Lord knows it, and the Lord knows when it is. It's in store, it's out there coming.
Yes.
The hope.
Good. What else? So, okay, if he has a day in store, that means it's coming and he knows when it's going to come.
When it's for his people to come back, to the remnant to come back, or just...
Yes, that is going to happen in the day of the Lord. That's going to be one of the things that will happen. He will gather his remnant back.
Verse 12 says against all that is proud and lofty.
Yeah, okay. Yes, a huge theme of the day of the Lord is cutting down the proud and lofty and raising up the lowly. So I was just thinking about the idea of the day being in store. If you think about God providing each day in history, Isaiah is very close. History is very important in the book of Isaiah. And the biblical concept of history is not circular like many of the other nations around them. It's linear. It's going somewhere to a point. And so God has this day in store. God gives each day, but he has this special day in store. He owns all the days, but there is another day that he's holding in store as he gives day after day that is his in a very special way, in a peculiar way. He owns all the days. And by days, we could mean time periods, like back in my day, right? It doesn't have to be a literal day. It could be a literal day, but that's not the point. The point is, God gives all time. But there is a time coming that God is holding in store. And when the time is right, that day will come. And that's when everything will be made right. And there's going to be all kinds of things happening which we're going to look at. Bringing back together the people, cutting down the lofty, like Michael said, all kinds of things. So we're going to look at all of those. So let's see, we've got 5 people. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So I said with a partner, but let's just each do it on our own. So Lynn, if you could take that first reference, 2:12 through 22, and Ellie, if you could take 3:7. Now notice the hint. If you only have one verse, you're going to have to read the context to find the answer. And the answers you're looking for in your passage, let me just give them out. Then Lynn Bennett, if you could do 4:2 through 6. So skipping those ones in parentheses. And then Donna, could you do 10:20?
Okay.
And Michael, could you do chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, which I think is the whole chapter. Okay. So you're looking for what time period is this passage referring to, or this verse? You're going to have to look around the verse. And then write how you know that. Write like the line or the key phrase from the Bible.
Support your answer.
Yes. And then the second question is, overall, is this day that it's talking about, it could be about a different time period, they're all going to be different time periods. But is this day overall a positive or a negative thing? And then support your answer from the text. So that's it. Does everybody know what passage they're doing? Okay. How did you do? Good. Okay, another half hour? Sounds good. Sorry, it's okay. We'll talk about it. Okay, so, yeah, I'm sure as we talk about your section, it'll come back to you, all the things you're thinking. But let's all look at chapter 2, verses 12 through 22. And then you can tell us what you found.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay, I said the end days, the end times.
That's correct. Yeah, this is about time period 5, which we're talking about. If there's a miniature version of it,
Why'd you put 1 and 2?
the first coming and the second coming.
But this would be number 5.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So it's time period 5. Okay, fair enough. Yes, that's correct. And how did you know that?
Well, he references several places around the globe, not just, and he doesn't reference the people of Israel. He keeps referring to men in general, mankind in general. The haughtiness of mankind, he's going to shake the earth. It doesn't say he's going to shake Israel or anything like that. Every man's going to cast away his idols of silver and gold.
What verse is that?
20.
Okay.
He's talking about all the rocks and, that the glory of God's majesty is going to appear when he does these things. So,
Yeah. In verse 21, they will flee to the caverns and the rocks and the overhanging crags from the dread of the Lord and the splendor of his majesty when he rises to shake the earth. Yes, good. And then after that great description of eschatology, Isaiah, I included this, he tacks on this verse. Stop trusting in man, who has but a breath in his nostrils, and what account is he? And you can understand, now that we've gone over chapter 7 with Ahaz trusting in TP3, Tiglath-Pileser III, instead of God. When you think about the great and terrible day of the Lord, the great and glorious day of the Lord, you can see why Isaiah would be, you'd have to be a fool to trust in a human being over God. Okay, good. So, is this overall a positive or a negative thing? This
it's on how you look at it, I guess.
it depends on how you look at it. Okay,
From
good.
his point of view.
Elaborate.
Well, for we as Christians, we're going to be saved and be with the Lord. But for all those people who denied him over the centuries, it's not going to be their fate. They'll be in the eternal lake of fire.
Right. So yes, from God's point of view, it's going to be really good because he'll be glorified. And from anyone who's on God's side, his point of view, it'll be good. But from all the pagans who they see God and they cast away their idols to the moles and the rats and the bats, it's not going to be a good thing for them. Yes, that's exactly right. It depends on whose point of view. Okay. Any questions about that? And that is the introduction. You can see 2:12 is where I got that line that I put in the heading. For the Lord Almighty has a day in store. And it says, of course, all the proud and lofty will be brought down. So yeah, it's good for some and bad for others. All right, Ellie, 3:7.
Yes,
So
I did 2:7, so I'm just doing
Oh.
3:7, I'm sorry. It looks to me like the time period, that would be number 2, the exile for judgment.
that's correct, yeah. So that's going to be that little red box right there.
And it's going to be a horrible, horrible time.
Well, first, how do you know it's about the exile?
Well, I know it was 7, but I looked at the verses ahead.
Yeah,
so that
good.
I could
So,
kind of
so
figure
where
out.
did you find?
Chapter 3, verse 1, see now the Lord God Almighty is about to take Jerusalem and Judah, both supply and support.
Okay, good. Yeah, he's going to take away there.
Right.
Yes. So yes, it is about the coming judgment. It's just around the corner.
And people don't, from what it looks like, it said, but in that day he will cry out, I have no remedy. I have no food or clothing in my house. Do not make me a leader of the people. People didn't want to take any kind of responsibility. it was a very negative time, I would say, for the people.
Yes, good. A negative time. But note 3:10. Tell the righteous it will be well with them, for they will enjoy the fruit of their deeds. Then 3:11, woe to the wicked. So again, it is a negative time, but there's also, it's a positive time for some. Yeah. Okay, so this all is under the heading the day of the Lord, right? But we've got two very different time periods. I mean, that happened around 600 BC. And the day of the Lord, the day in store that Lynn was referring to, is happening around, I don't know, it's going to be somewhere either 2019 or future. So that's kind of a, let's just hold that time discrepancy in the back of our minds, and we'll come back to that. All right, Lynn Bennett, you had chapter 4, verses 2 through 6?
2 through 6. So it's time period number 5, the end times.
Good, and how do you know that?
I guess I could make the case from a number of the verses, but particularly the 3rd verse. It will come about that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy. Everyone who is recorded for life in Jerusalem.
Okay, yeah. The people are going to be made holy.
4, 5, and 6 also kind of support that as well.
Yeah, you're right. It is. Okay. Yeah, I have something to say about that, but let's see what you got regarding is it a positive or negative time period?
I said it was positive.
Uh-huh.
And especially the 2nd verse says, in that day the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth will be the pride, excuse me, and the adornment of the survivors of Israel.
Okay, good. Now, what? Yeah, the support. What verse was your main support from? The first one you said?
For the question 1 or 2?
For the first question.
I said, actually 3 through 6 I'll do, but 3 more so.
But what should I write?
Why don't you just say fire by night? I mean, that obviously hasn't happened yet. There's no,
Verse 5.
I mean, it's obviously a reference to the time of Moses, right? The cloud by day and the fire by night. But this is going to happen, this is future, and it hasn't happened again since. So that tells us that this is definitely future, sometime past us now. Okay, and it's a positive time. But I'm just going to, well, no. We'll talk more about that in the New Jerusalem section if we have time. Good job. Okay, Donna, you had 10:20?
Right, and I'm vacillating about the time period, but we'll talk about that, so I'll give you some facts, I know my facts are right.
Okay.
It was a time of judgment, in the verse 12, well, verse 5, he speaks and he says, woe to Assyria, and it was Assyria, if you remember, were the first people to conquer Babylon. They were first to invade.
They were the first to invade where?
Babylon.
They did invade Babylon.
Right. They were the first to invade Babylon.
Do you think that's what this is referring to?
Well, I haven't gotten down to the whole thing.
Okay.
I'm just doing a little history.
Okay, all right.
Okay. and that he's referring to my people, meaning Judah and Israel. And I thought sort of the key, verse 12 was a very key verse. It says, therefore it shall come to pass, when the Lord has performed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, that he will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant, and that's the king of Assyria that he's talking about there, and the glory of his high looks. It depends on who you are as to whether it is positive or negative. If you're Assyria, it's negative.
Yeah.
If you're the judger, then it's positive for what's happening. And he spoke about the remnant of Israel. When we got over, there's more in there. I didn't get time to all of it. I'm just going to read it all. But
It's a lot.
It says, and it will come to pass that in that day, that the remnant of Israel, and such have escaped of and it goes on to tell, what's going to happen then. And so I kind of thought, one side of me thought maybe it was the return, but it didn't make sense to me in the order that we're doing things in the way he's written the book.
Well,
So I really don't know, I'm admitting that.
yeah, well, it's definitely,
It's judgment, I know.
yes, there's a couple layers, but the most basic and obvious is that it's about the return time period.
So it is return, okay, good.
Yeah,
That's my-
just after the exile, because
Yes.
he's punishing Assyria. He's using Assyria. Look, he says, woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger in verse 5. He used Assyria as a rod to punish his people. And it describes the historical, 722 BC attack of Assyria on Samaria, which was the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom. He talks about that in verse 10. But when, verse 12, like you said, is a key verse. When I finished the work of using you to punish my people, then I'm going to punish you because you thought you were so great when really you were just a rod in my hand. And then it has this interesting...
We use the word arrogant several times when he talks about the king.
Yeah. Verse 15, does the axe raise itself above him who swings it? You're just the instrument, and I'm the wielder of the instrument. You think you're better than me. Verse 15 describes that. So it's definitely talking about once I've done using you, then I'm going to punish you. And I'm going to bring my people back from where you sent them. Yes. But you're right, there are other layers here. And you didn't really explain that too much. You said it didn't make sense with something. You said if it's just about the return, it doesn't make sense with, what were you saying?
The timeline of the whole book. Is that what you said?
I'm sorry?
You said the fact that it's the return didn't fit in with, did you say the timeline of the book?
I said that was what I was trying to work through when I was looking at the timeline.
Oh, okay.
But I thought it was the return, but I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Because then part of, is about the actual, what will happen with the returning in terms of the remnant of Israel. And I didn't get that far, I just saw that header.
Yeah, well, go ahead and look down in verse 26.
Okay.
He says, don't be afraid of them. The Lord Almighty will lash them with a whip, as when he struck down Midian at the rock of Oreb. He will raise his rod over the waters, as he did in Egypt. In that day, their burden will be lifted from your shoulders, their yoke from your neck. So he's saying, remember when I rescued you from the oppression and the military possession of Egypt, and then also of Midian, and then it's going to be Assyria. But you can see that God, in using Isaiah as his prophet, is showing that there's a pattern for the way God operates in this world. These are all examples of the day of the Lord, but number 5, the one Lynn Major had, is the ultimate day of the Lord. So he starts out, there's an ultimate day of the Lord, but there's also a day of the Lord coming for Syria. And then I'm going to use Babylon. And then there's going to be a day of the Lord for Babylon. And I'm going to use Media Persia. That's just the way God operates.
Well, the hope then would be the deliverance of Israel, right?
Yes, but not just to Israel. The hope is that there's going to be deliverance for all the oppressed, and there's going to be deliverance for all the righteous. And then there's another hope, because like when you feel like you're the oppressed one, you know, God will deliver me because that's the way God is. Well, but because this evil person is, but I'm evil too. So judgment's coming from me too. That's why Isaiah writes this way. It's all connected. The judgment, you can't make it neat and say, judgment is on the bad people and deliverance is on the good people. But the good people are bad too. So they need judgment also. So it gets very convoluted. And what happens is he develops these themes. And
Well, I'm really glad that you've gone ahead, because I didn't get that far.
Yeah.
I said it was one verse, and so I was reading the context, and so I'm really glad you explained that.
yeah, and I think it'll get more clear as we go on in the notes. But
I know it's super obvious, but on our timeline, number 3,
yeah, the return. Yeah.
the return.
So let's do this last one, and then we can. This last one might. Yeah, chapter 12.
Yeah, 1 through 6. I saw it as a sign of his first coming.
That is correct.
Very, very positive.
Where did you?
Everyone's very happy and got a song in their heart and singing for joy. I think the giveaway is probably verse 6. Shout and sing for joy, O inhabitant of Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. Of course, that's referring to Jesus. But in this day I give thanks. You turned away your anger, God, that you were angry. You're no longer angry. You're comforting me. You're my salvation, the well of salvation. So it's all very positive, no doom and gloom. It's all praise, comfort, joy, redemption. For Jesus.
Yeah. So this is
doing for Israel.
this is time period 4, Kate. Yeah, and show where that is. Yes, at the time of Jesus. Okay, but this starts out in that day. So he's talking in chapter 11 about a certain time period, and then he goes on at the beginning of chapter 12. In that day, you will say all this. So you are correct. The main time period is the first coming of the Messiah, but it also refers to eschatology, because just back up to chapter 11, verse 15. Lynn, could you read verse 15 for us?
15 of 11.
Yeah.
The Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. With his mighty wind he will shake his fist over the river and strike it in the 7 streams and make men cross over dry shod.
Okay. So the river is referring to the Euphrates River. A lot of translations have that. Has the Euphrates River been broken up into 7 streams to the point where people can wade across in sandals? It has not. So this is a future time period. Verse 16, there will be a highway for the remnant of his people that is left from Assyria, as there was for Israel when they came up from Egypt. So it keeps the day of the Lord. And they didn't use the phrase day of the Lord in the Exodus story. Way back, show them where the Exodus story is. No, very close. One more over. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
they're leaving Egypt.
This is Egypt.
Yeah, right in between there. They didn't use that, but they used the phrase the day when they're celebrating the Red Sea crossing, that the Lord rescued them from their oppressors on this day. And Isaiah is picking that up, that terminology, and saying this is God's day. Just like that, it's going to be now. He uses Assyria because that's who currently is oppressing them. But that's also going to be, in verse chapter 12, in that day, that future day, you're going to be like, praise, thanks, all this positive stuff that Michael talked about. And that's referring to their Messiah coming. But that same theme, motif, is also going to apply in the ultimate day of the Lord. So the primary one, like Michael said, is the first coming. But it also does have connections with the eschatology one, and it also does have connections with the literal return.
You're kind of like reference, you think, say it's referencing that 1,000-year reign on God is here.
Well, I'm sort of rolling all that stuff up into one ball of wax with the word eschatology. What they refer to as the 1,000-year reign, and then also the new heaven and new earth. In my mind, that's all a little foggy to us, what that's all going to look like.
I don't know if this was specifically referencing that, or more general.
I would say,
As far as the eschatology.
I'm not sure what like a traditional, strict dispensationalist would say to that. If they would say it's specifically the 1,000-year reign, or if it's the new heaven and new earth reign. So I don't know. But in my mind, we shouldn't make such firm distinctions, because just like the Jews who were waiting for Jesus, they had some clues about what it would look like when he came, but they certainly had some things wrong. When it hasn't happened yet, it's very easy to get things wrong.
So much so they rejected it when it did get.
Yeah, yeah. They were like, no, he's going to sit on the throne of his father David. So the crowd wanted to make him king by force. And he's like, well, yeah, but actually these things are separated out a little differently than you expected. So they may have had sound biblical ideas, but so my point is that how everything's going to play out and what it's all going to look like at the second coming, the different things that happen, I try to just say, well, it's something of the eschatology. So that was all me sounding smart, but really just saying, I don't know.
We should move along.
Yes, we should
That was
move on.
really good though.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Please don't erase that, I couldn't see all of it, and I'm gonna move that back to what's in comments, okay?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
that's great.
so
Want me to read there?
if, as you noticed as we were going through, there was some, well, yeah, it's referring to that, but it's also referring to this. So here is why the time periods are interwoven.
The time periods are interwoven because, just like Isaiah's experience, remember we're talking about chapter 6, the vision he had in or around the temple.
His sin and the fire, coal, and then his resulting purity.
He was confronted with his sin, and the angel used burning coal and then made him clean.
Mm-hmm.
So sin, fire, and cleansing.
Yeah, purity is what I had, but yeah, same thing.
That whole experience was a microcosm, a picture of the whole nation and the whole exile and return. So the exile and return becomes a microcosm or picture of all human history.
So, Isaiah has this experience, he's sinful, then fire, and then he's clean. The nation is sinful, then the fiery judgment, and then the remnant's purified. And then the whole nation becomes a picture of all of human history, right? I mean, there's all these human beings, they all sin, there's the judgment, and all sin is punished. Luckily for me, my sin was punished through Jesus Christ in my place. For others, their sin's going to be punished on them because they rejected Jesus. But either way, you have sin, you have the judgment and punishment, and then some are purified. So you see how, yeah. So that is reason, lowercase a, as to why the time periods are interwoven. There's two more reasons.
The day of the Lord is a powerful image, going from the Exodus, the start of their nation.
Okay, so the day of the Lord, Isaiah is using the image of Exodus, God rescuing his people, in connection with the day of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. All the way till the end of history, when their Jewish king will rule all nations, the culmination of their nation.
So the whole people of Israel, it starts and ends. They became a nation at the Exodus, and ultimately their king and their nation will rule, and their capital city will be the capital of the world. So the day of the Lord is, in some ways, the whole story of their people.
This image, is so powerful that it can be used to refer to any story in which the wrongdoer finally gets what's coming to him, and the righteous oppressed person is finally vindicated and triumphant. So the phrase Day of the Lord means...
Hold on. I just want to say, that image of Day of the Lord can be applied to any story. So this can be applied to the time when I was wrongfully accused at work. And so I can think, you know what? In the end, all wrongs will be made right. I don't have to get bent out of shape about this because it's all going to be made right. It could be applied to my whole life. If I had a whole horrible life, I can say, this is terrible, but in the end, it'll all be made right. Or somebody who lived, some slave in Isaiah's day, 700 BC. Could apply to a small situation in his life, can be applied to his whole life. Because it's the story of humanity, is that things are not right now, but they will be made right in the end.
So the phrase Day of the Lord means when God finally rights the wrong. It will be a good thing for some and a bad thing for others. There are many Day of the Lords,
Lowercase d.
lowercase d, but there will also be one ultimate capital D Day of the Lord. So he's making things right as he goes, but one day he's going to make it right for all time.
So you could call the Exodus the Day of the Lord. You could call the return the Day of the Lord. You could call Sodom and Gomorrah burning and Lot being saved the Day of the Lord. Those would all be lowercase d's, but there will be one ultimate Day of the Lord.
And that capital D is Judgment Day?
Yeah, all the stuff that'll happen when he returns and punishes the nations and makes...
What's number 5?
Yeah, that's number 5, is the ultimate Day of the Lord. And Satan is bound in the pit, and everything is made new, and the curse is lifted.
So that's eschatology. There's so many events. Rapture, the wake up, judgment, and the return, thousand reign. So I don't know if you're referring to specifically one event
Again,
as the Day of the Lord.
like, from Isaiah's point of view, the first coming of Jesus would be all wrapped up in that too. The Messiah's going to come. Well, actually he's going to come, and then there's going to be several thousand years later, he's going to come again. This time he's going to punish certain aspects, like what dispensationalists would call the tribulation, and then there's going to be other punishments, and then there's going to be this time period, and there'll be the ultimate punishment. It's all stretched out in lots of details. But the big point is, from the Isaiah and other prophets of his time period, the day of the Lord is coming. The ultimate day when all wrongs will be made right. Now, whether that's at the millennial reign or whether that's the new heaven and new earth, I think it's probably the second, but I'm sure people disagree about that. That's not as important as the fact that there is an ultimate day of the Lord coming. Yeah. Another way to look at it is letter C, and why it's all interwoven.
This is simply how God responds to human sin in all circumstances. Sin leads to judgment, which leads to hope.
Now, how would judgment lead to hope? If you cannot read ahead in that parenthesis, if you can just think about it.
Judgment produces hope because judgment
Gives us a chance for us to repent
Yeah.
Okay.
and turn.
And purifies, yes. I have purges, but purified is equally right. It purges away evil people, so it separates between the evil and the good. But another way to look at it, or it purges away the evil from a person. So the only way you actually can separate the good from the evil is if some people you separate the evil from inside their hearts, so that you can have good people. No one is good on their own, but some are made good by God, just like Isaiah is not good, but God makes him good. And then now that he's been made pure, he's distinct from the people. It's kind of a complicated concept, but do you follow that? I'm just going to do an illustration just to make sure. Okay. So you have all these people, right? And the day of the Lord comes and says, you know what? I'm going to separate these people from these people, and these people will get burned up. And these are the good people. But the problem is there is no good people. So before he can do that, he has to take each person in their heart and say, I'm going to purge the evil out of you. That's what the coal represented for Isaiah, touching his lips. Now, how he does that doesn't get revealed until way later in the book, starting in chapter 40, with the suffering servant in Isaiah 53, which is Jesus Christ. But all we know so far is God has some plan to purify a heart, and that coal represented that. So in order to get these good people, he does this to all their hearts, does something inside them, then he can say, okay, so I did that purging, now I can actually purge the wicked from the good, now that I've made some people good. So the purging, the fire, the judgment represents both. Because everybody's sin gets punished. Some people's sin just gets punished through Jesus.
So in light of all that, so that the final outcome is all wrongs made right.
Yes, and then in parentheses, a way to think of that is made up for. For example, imagine if someone came up to you and said, I'm so sorry that I ran over your children and killed them all. Here's $1 million. You see, that does not make up for it. It doesn't make up for it. But on the great day of the Lord, it will be made up for. And how that actually plays out is a little bit of a mystery. That's why it's so sad when you hear about a child suffering or dying and you think that can't be made up for. In our minds, in our human minds, that can't be made up for. But nothing is impossible for God. So it will be made up for. And how that'll actually happen, we have no idea. Well, we have some clues. But we know that God is good, and God is wise, and God is all-powerful, and his ways are not our ways. All wrong for being made right. Okay, we'll have to do New Jerusalem next week.
But that's why this class is 3 months long,
Yes.
so that we can do the Day of
That's
the
how
Lord.
it should be.
Yeah, we can do the Day of the Lord well and not have to worry so much.
Let's close in prayer. Kate, would you like to close?
God, we thank you so much for your word, and we thank you that you love us, and that you are totally just, and that you have the ability to make all things right. God, I just pray that we could rest in that, and to trust you and your ways and your wisdom, and we thank you for your love for us, and the fact that you sent your son. All these things are pointing toward that, and we just want to be reminded of your great grace. Help us to just have joy in that today. In Jesus' name, amen.
We're not gonna be here next week, are we?
Okay.
Yeah. I'll be on the bus trip.
Okay. Oh, that's right, the Ark.
Yeah.
Exciting.
That's cool.
I saw Steve outside, but I don't know why he didn't come in. I said